Okay, picture this. You wake up one morning and the ocean is right at your doorstep. And I don't mean it's just visiting. It's moved in, for good. Sounds like a horror movie, right? But for tens of millions of people, this isn't some far-off nightmare. It's a reality barreling down on them. If we keep pumping out emissions like there's no tomorrow, by 2100, areas where about 630 million folks live could be regularly swamped by high tides. This isn't just about losing a bit of beach. It's about entire communities, cultures, and even whole countries fighting a desperate battle against the rising water. And honestly, some are already losing. Think about our coastlines. These huge areas are the lifeblood for so many nations. Almost 900 million people live in these low-lying zones, and now they're caught in a serious struggle. The ocean, pushed higher by a warming planet, isn't some threat we can ignore for another few decades. It's a quiet crisis happening every single day, as land disappears and futures get rewritten. We're going to look at the nation staring down catastrophic land loss, the truly shocking size of this global emergency, and the efforts often overwhelmed to keep from going under. This is the story of countries literally on the edge of being swallowed by the waves. So what's actually making the waters rise? The main problem is global sea level rise, and it's a direct hit from climate change. Two big things are happening here. First, as the world gets hotter, glaciers and those massive ice sheets in place like Greenland and Antarctica are melting way faster than they should be. All that meltwater, it's pouring into the oceans. Just get this. In 2023, glaciers lost more ice than ever recorded. Enough water to fill the Dead Sea 5 times over. Second, when seawater warms up, it expands. They call it thermal expansion. It might sound like a tiny change, but between 1993 and 2024, global sea levels have already climbed by over 10 centimeters, and it's speeding up. In fact, NASA found in 2024 that sea levels are rising surprisingly fast. But it's not just the seas pushing up. It's a lot of crowded coastal areas. The land itself is actually sinking. This sinking, or subsidence, often happens because we're pumping out too much groundwater for our growing cities and farms. Or sometimes just because of the sheer weight of all our buildings. It's like a deadly 1-2 punch, making the relative sea level rise even faster and hit even harder. And to make things worse, storm surges are getting more intense. Higher sea levels mean these powerful surges can reach further inland, causing way more destruction. Few places are as exposed to the rising tide as Bangladesh. A huge chunk of its packed country is a low-lying delta, formed where massive rivers like the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna meet the sea. This geography has supported life for thousands of years, but now it puts Bangladesh right in the crosshairs. The scale of the threat is just mind-boggling. Right now, nearly 10 million people in Bangladesh live on land that's likely to be in the annual flood risk zone by the year 2100. And that number could jump to over 30 million as the seas keep climbing. By 2025, that's practically around the corner. Coastal erosion and seawater seeping into fertile lands are expected to hit food production hard. This could displace millions and make it even tougher for people to find enough to eat. And it's not just a slow creeping problem. It's also about sudden devastating events. The country is facing a tenfold increase in how often destructive storms tides hit, with powerful cyclones hitting more and more often during the monsoon season. This means flood after flood, with barely any time to recover in between. Now, Bangladesh has a long history of dealing with floods and has invested a lot in storm preparedness and building coastal defenses. But here's the catch. Those measures are mostly based on how the climate used to be. Experts are warning they might be nowhere near enough to handle what's coming. The fight here isn't just about saving land, it's about whether a nation can keep feeding and housing its people. Indonesia, a sprawling nation of over 17,000 islands, is getting hit from two sides: rising sea levels, and in some of the biggest cities, land that's sinking incredibly fast. By 2050, it's predicted that coastal flooding will swamp the homes of around 23 million people in Indonesia's coastal cities. Fast forward to the end of the century, and land where over 16 million people currently live is expected to be in the annual flood risk zone. The most jaw-dropping example is Jakarta, the massive capital city. Parts of this megacity are sinking by as much as 28 centimeters a year. That's not a typo. This extreme sinking is mostly because of decades of taking out too much groundwater without much regulation. It means the city, in some spots, is disappearing faster than the sea is rising. The Indonesian government has even made this huge decision to move its capital to Borneo, a massive project driven by the very real threat to Jakarta's existence. But the trouble doesn't stop with Jakarta. Indonesia is ranked among the top 5 countries in the world when it comes to vulnerability to sea level rise. Scientists expect sea levels to rise 10 centimeters by 2030 and 21 centimeters by 2060. But local sinking and more frequent extreme weather could make things much worse, especially in key rice-growing areas where salt water getting into the soil is a big worry. Even the last tropical glaciers in Indonesia's New Guinea have vanished, a clear sign of just how much the climate is warming. The fight here is a race against both the rising ocean and the sinking earth, with the country's economic heart and huge stretches of its populated coastline on the line. The World Bank is actually working with cities like Manado on using nature, like restoring mangrove forests to help soften the blow from storm surges. Vietnam's Mekong Delta, often called the country's rice bowl because it's so fertile, is another place fighting a tough losing battle. This huge low-lying area is incredibly sensitive to even small increases in sea level. Right now, about 18 million people in Vietnam are at risk from coastal flooding. That number is expected to shoot up to over 25 million by 2100. You can already see the damage. Salt water is creeping into farmland, making large areas useless for growing traditional rice and threatening the way millions of farmers make a living. The coastline is eroding, and floods, especially during the monsoon, are getting more common and more severe. Ho Chi Minh City, the country's economic engine just north of the delta, could see large parts of it underwater by 2050. The Vietnamese government is trying to adapt by building things like dikes and sluice gates, and by encouraging farmers to switch to aquaculture or crops that can handle more salt. But the sheer size of the Mekong Delta and how quickly things are changing make this an enormous challenge. The desperate fight here isn't just about protecting land and homes. It's about saving a vital food-producing region that's crucial for Vietnam and the wider region. Just look at Typhoon Yagi in September 2024. It forced a lot of people from their homes across Vietnam, showing just how vulnerable the country is to weather events that are being made worse by climate change. This crisis of rising waters isn't just hitting a few unlucky nations. It's a worldwide problem with a long, grim list of countries in trouble. With its long, crowded coastline, India is facing a huge challenge. Over 15 million people are currently at risk from coastal flooding, and that's expected to climb to more than 24 million by 2100. Big cities like Mumbai and Kolkata are especially vulnerable. Kolkata already deals with regular monsoon flooding, and that's only going to get worse. People are looking into natural solutions like planting mangrove forests to help protect against flooding. Thailand. In Thailand, over 16 million people currently live on land at risk. While this number isn't projected to jump quite as dramatically by 2100 as in some other places, the capital, Bangkok, is in serious trouble. One index even called it the world's most vulnerable city to sea level rise. And just like Jakarta, Bangkok is sinking. Projections suggest a third of the city would be underwater by 2050 if things don't change. For countries like Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Maldives, rising sea levels are nothing short of an existential threat. These low-lying island nations could see huge parts of their land disappear under the waves. This means losing homes, freshwater sources getting contaminated, and potentially losing their status as nations. Tuvalu, where the average land height is just 2 meters above sea level, is already looking into migration options, and even building new land to protect itself. The Maldives is also dredging land for new homes. These countries are right on the front line, their very existence hanging in the balance. The Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project, which aims to protect nearly 2,800 meters of vulnerable coastline, is supposed to be finished in 2025. This nation gets hit by a lot of typhoons, and rising sea levels will make storm surges worse, especially in crowded cities like Manila. Luckily, better early warning systems helped communities prepare for typhoons in 2024, and developed nations aren't safe either. It's really important to get that this isn't just a problem for developing nations. The coastlines of the United States, especially the East and Gulf coasts, are at high risk. Think about cities like Miami, New York, and New Orleans. They are all facing serious threats. Over in Europe, countries like the Netherlands have amazing coastal defenses, but the expected yearly damage from coastal floods for Europe is already 1.25 billion euros and could shoot up without more adaptation. Even New Zealand is working on policies to make sure new public housing isn't built in areas prone to climate hazards. When you hear about these individual countries, it's bad enough. But when you step back and look at the whole picture, the true shocking scale of this quiet crisis really hits you. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people all over the world whose homes, jobs, and ancestral lands are in danger. Even if we cut emissions significantly, projections show that around 190 million people live in areas that could be below high tide lines by 2100. If emissions stay high and if we factor in potential problems with Antarctic ice sheets, that number could balloon to roughly 630 million. Rising seas don't just mean losing land. They mean saltwater getting into freshwater sources and farmland, which messes with food security for millions. They mean the destruction of crucial coastal habitats like mangroves and coral reefs, the very things that act as natural defenses and support so much life. They mean an explosion in costs for coastal protection, fixing infrastructure, and responding to disasters, potentially adding up to trillions of dollars globally. And maybe the most heartbreaking part, they mean huge numbers for people being forced from their homes, creating climate migrants and refugees on a scale we've never seen before. The Internal Displacement Monitoring Center reported that in 2024 alone, climate-related disasters pushed over 9.8 million people from their homes, many of these low-lying coastal areas. The World Economic Forum's 2025 Global Risks Report actually ranks critical change to Earth's systems, which includes sea level rise as the third biggest threat to the world in the next 10 years. The sheer size of this crisis can feel pretty overwhelming. I get it. But knowing what's happening is the first step towards doing something about it. Understanding which countries are being swallowed by the waves and why it's happening is so important. If this information has opened your eyes, please share this video. Spreading the word about this silent emergency helps build the global awareness we desperately need to tackle one of the biggest challenges of our time. And hey, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the critical issues shaping our world. The fight against the rising oceans is one humanity just can't afford to lose. Yet for so many coastal communities and entire nations, the waves aren't just coming, they're already at the gates, and in some places they've broken through. Those images of sinking cities and disappearing islands, they're not some distant future horror show. They're happening right now. This desperate fight involves incredible engineering, ambitious plans to move entire populations, and the quiet strength of communities trying to adapt to a threat to their very existence. But often, these efforts are just dwarfed by the size of the problem, a problem that's fueled by what we're all doing globally. What happens to these vulnerable nations is a serious wake-up call for all of us. Without urgent, dramatic cuts in global emissions and a massive increase in support for adaptation, the map of our world will change forever. The question isn't just which countries will be swallowed by the waves soon. It's what the world will do to stop this silent crisis from becoming an irreversible catastrophe for millions. The UN Ocean Conference in June 2025 is hammering home the urgent need for strong climate action, because the policies we set today will decide how bad the sea level rise gets. The choices we make right now will determine whether future generations look back at this time as the moment we finally turn the tide, or the moment we just let it all wash away.